The Academy Award for Best Sound Mixing is an Academy Award that recognizes the finest or most euphonic sound mixing or recording, and is generally awarded to the production sound mixers and re-recording mixers of the winning film. Compare this award to the Academy Award for Best Sound Editing. In the lists below, the winner of the award for each year is shown first, followed by the other nominees. For the second and third year of this category, the 4th Academy Awards, 5th Academy Awards, only the names of the film companies were listed. Paramount Public Studio Sound Department won both years. 1930s, 1929 1930, The Big House, Douglas Shearer, Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer Studio, The Case of Sergeant Grisha, John Tribby, The Love Parade, Franklin Hansen, Raffles, Oskar Lagerstrom, The Song of the Flame, George Grooves, 1930 1931, Paramount Public Studio Sound Department, MGM Studio Sound Department, RKO Radio Studio Sound Department, Samuel Goldwyn United Artists Studio Sound Department, 1931 1932, Paramount Public Studio Sound Department, MGM Studio Sound Department, RKO Radio Studio Sound Department, Walt Disney, Warner Brothers, First National Studio Sound Department, 1932 1933, A Farewell to Arms, Franklin Hansen, Paramount Studio, 42nd Street, Nathan Levinson, Gold Diggers of 1933, Nathan Levinson, I Am a Fugitive from a Chain Gang, Nathan Levinson, 1934, One Night of Love, John Lividary, Columbia Studio, The Affairs of Cellini, Thomas T. Moulton, Cleopatra, Franklin B. Hansen, Flirtation Walk, Nathan Levinson, The Gay Divorcee, Carl Dreyer, Imitation of Life, Theodore Soderbergh, Viva Villa, Douglas Shearer, White Parade, Edmund H. Hansen, 1935, Naughty Marietta, Douglas Shearer, Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer Studio, $1,000 a minute, Republic Studio Sound Department, Bride of Frankenstein, Gilbert Kurland, Captain Blood, Nathan Levinson, The Dark Angel, Thomas T. Moulton, I Dream Too Much, Carl Dreyer, The Lives of a Bengal Lancer, Franklin B. Hansen, Love Me Forever, John Lividary, Thanks a Million, E. H. Hansen, 1936, San Francisco, Douglas Shearer, Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer Studio, Banjo on My Knee, E. H. Hansen, The Charge of the Light Brigade, Nathan Levinson, Dodsworth, Thomas T. Moulton, General Spanky, Elmer Raguse, Mr. Deeds Goes to Town, John Lividary, The Texas Rangers, Franklin B. Hansen, That Girl from Paris, John Alberg, Three Smart Girls, Homer G. Tasker, 1937, The Hurricane, Thomas Moulton, United Artists Studio, The Girl Said No, A. E. K. Hitting a New High, John Alberg, In Old Chicago, E. H. Hansen, The Life of Emile Zola, Nathan Levinson, Lost Horizon, John Lividary, Maytime, Douglas Shearer, 100 Men and a Girl, Homer G. Tasker, Topper, Elmer Raguse, Wells Fargo, Lauren L. Ryder, 1938, The Cowboy and the Lady, Thomas Moulton, United Artists Studio, Army Girl, Charles L. Ludens, Four Daughters, Nathan Levinson, If I Were King, Lauren L. Ryder, Merrily We Live, Elmer Raguse, Suez, Edmund H. Hansen, Sweethearts, Douglas Shearer, That Certain Age, Bernard B. Brown, Vivacious Lady, John Alberg, You Can't Take It With You, John Lividary, 1939, When Tomorrow Comes, Bernard B. Brown, Universal Studio, Balalaika, Douglas Shearer, Gone with the Wind, Thomas T. Moulton, Goodbye, Mr. Chips, A. W. Watkins, The Great Victor Herbert, Lauren L. Ryder, The Hunchback of Notre Dame, John Alberg, Man of Conquest, Charles L. Ludens, Mr. Smith Goes to Washington, John Lividary, Of Mice and Men, Elmer Raguse, The Private Lives of Elizabeth and Essex, Nathan Levinson, The Rains Came, E. H. Hansen, 1940s, 1940, Strike Up the Band, Douglas Shearer, Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer Studio, Behind the News, Charles L. Ludens, Captain Caution, Elmer Raguse, The Grapes of Wrath, E. H. Hansen, The Howards of Virginia, Jack Whitney, Kitty Foyle, The Natural History of a Woman, John Alberg, Northwest Mounted Police, Lauren L. Ryder, Our Town, Thomas T. Moulton, The Seahawk, Nathan Levinson, Spring Parade, Bernard B. Brown, Too Many Husbands, John Lividary, 1941, That Hamilton Woman, Jack Whitney, General Service, Appointment for Love, Bernard B. Brown, Ball of Fire, Thomas T. Moulton, The Chocolate Soldier, Douglas Shearer, Citizen Kane, John Alberg, The Devil Pays Off, Charles Ludens, How Green Was My Valley, E. H. Hansen, The Men in Her Life, John Lividary, Sergeant York, Nathan Levinson, Skylark, Lauren Ryder, Topper Returns, Elmer Raguez, 1942, Yankee Doodle Dandy, Nathan Levinson, Warner Brothers Studio, Arabian Nights, Bernard B. Brown, Bambi, Sam Slyfield, Flying Tigers, Daniel Bloomberg, Friendly Enemies, Jack Whitney, The Gold Rush, James L. Fields, Mrs. Miniver, Douglas Shearer, Once Upon a Honeymoon, Stephen Dunn, The Pride of the Yankees, Thomas T. Moulton, Road to Morocco, Lauren Ryder, This Above All, E. H. Hansen, You Were Never Lovelier, John Lividary, 1943, This Land Is Mine, Stephen Dunn, RKO Radio Studio, Hangmen Also Die, Jack Whitney, In Old Oklahoma, Daniel J. Bloomberg, Madame Curie, Douglas Shearer, The North Star, Thomas T. Moulton, Phantom of the Opera, Bernard B. Brown, Riding High, Lauren L. Ryder, Sahara, John Lividary, Saludos Amigos, C. O. Slyfield, So This Is Washington, James L. Fields, The Song of Bernadette, E. H. Hansen, This Is the Army, Nathan Levinson, 1944, Wilson, E. H. Hansen, 20th Century Fox Studio, Brazil, Daniel J. Bloomberg, Casanova Brown, Thomas T. Moulton, Cover Girl, John Lividary, Double Indemnity, Lauren L. Ryder, His Butler's Sister, Bernard B. Brown, Hollywood Canteen, Nathan Levinson, It Happened Tomorrow, Jack Whitney, Kismet, Douglas Shearer, Music in Manhattan, Stephen Dunn, Voice in the Wind, Mac Dalglish, 1945, The Bells of St. Mary's, Stephen Dunn, RKO Radio Studio, Flame of Barbary Coast, Daniel J. Bloomberg, Lady on a Train, Bernard B. Brown, Leave Her to Heaven, Thomas T. Moulton, Rhapsody in Blue, Nathan Levinson, A Song to Remember, John P. Lividary, The Southerner, Jack Whitney, They Were Expendable, Douglas Shearer, The Three Caballeros, C. O. Slyfield, Three is a Family, W. V. Wolf, The Unseen, Lauren L. Ryder, Wonder Man, Gordon E. Sawyer, 1946, The Jolson Story, John Lividary, Columbia Studio, The Best Years of Our Lives, Gordon E. Sawyer, It's a Wonderful Life, John Alberg, 1947, The Bishop's Wife, Gordon Sawyer, Samuel Goldwyn Studio, Green Dolphin Street, Douglas Shearer, T-Men, Jack Whitney, 1948, The Snake Pit, Thomas Moulton, 20th Century Fox Studio, Johnny Belinda, Nathan O. Levinson, Moonrise, Daniel J. Bloomberg, 1949, 12 O'Clock High, Thomas Moulton, 20th Century Fox Studio, Once More, My Darling, Leslie I. Carey, Sands of Iwo Jima, Daniel J. Bloomberg, 1950s, 1950, All About Eve, Thomas Moulton, 20th Century Fox Studio, Cinderella, C. O. Slyfield, Louisa, Leslie I. Carey, Our Very Own, Gordon Sawyer, Trio, Cyril Crowhurst, 1951, The Great Caruso, Douglas Shearer, Metro Goldwyn Mayer Studio, Bright Victory, Leslie I. Carey, I Want You, Gordon E. Sawyer, A Streetcar Named Desire, Nathan Levinson, Two Tickets to Broadway, John Alberg, 1952, The Sound Barrier, London Films Sound Department, The Card, Pinewood Studios Sound Department, Hans Christian Andersen, Gordon E. Sawyer, The Quiet Man, Daniel J. Bloomberg, With a Song in My Heart, Thomas T. Moulton, 1953, From Here to Eternity, John Lividary, Columbia Studio, Calamity Jane, William A. Mueller, Knights of the Round Table, A. W. Watkins, The Mississippi Gambler, Leslie I. Carey, The War of the Worlds, Lauren L. Ryder, 1954, The Glenn Miller Story, Leslie I. Carey, Universal International Studio, Brigadoon, Wesley C. Miller, The Caine Mutiny, John P. Lividary, Rear Window, Lauren L. Ryder, Susan Slept Here, John Alberg, 1955, Oklahoma, Fred Hines, Todd Howe Sound Department, Love is a Many Splendored Thing, Carlton W. Faulkner, Love Me or Leave Me, Wesley C. Miller, Mr. Roberts, William A. Mueller, Not as a Stranger, Watson Jones, RCA Sound Department, 1956, The King and I, Carlton W. Faulkner, 20th Century Fox Studio, The Brave One, Buddy Myers, The Eddie Duckin Story, John P. Lividary, Friendly Persuasion, Gordon R. Glennon and Gordon E. Sawyer, The Ten Commandments, Lauren L. Ryder, 1957, Sayonara, George Groves, Warner Brothers Studio, Gunfight at the OK, Corral, George Dutton, Less Girls, Wesley C. Miller, Pal Joey, John P. Lividary, Witness for the Prosecution, Gordon E. Sawyer, 1958, South Pacific, Fred Hines, Todd Howe Sound Department, I Want to Live, Gordon E. Sawyer, A Time to Love and a Time to Die, Leslie I. Carey, Vertigo, George Dutton, The Young Lions, Carlton W. Faulkner, 1959, Ben-Hur, Franklin Milton, Metro Goldwyn Mayer Studio, Journey to the Center of the Earth, Carlton W. Faulkner, Libel, A. W. Watkins, The Nun's Story, George Grooves, Porgy and Bess, Gordon E. Sawyer and Fred Hines. 1960s. 1960, The Alamo, Fred Hines, Todd Howe Sound Department and Gordon Sawyer, Samuel Goldwyn Studio, The Apartment, Gordon E. Sawyer, Cimarron, Franklin Milton, Pepe, Charles Rice, Sunrise at Campobello, George Grooves. 1961, West Side Story, Gordon Sawyer, Samuel Goldwyn Studio and Fred Hines, Todd Howe Sound Department, The Children's Hour, Gordon E. Sawyer, Flower Drum Song, Walden O. Watson, The Guns of Navarone, John Cox, The Parent Trap, Robert O. Cook. 1962, Lawrence of Arabia, John Cox, Shepperton Studios, Bon Voyage, Robert O. Cook, The Music Man, George Groves, That Touch of Mink, Walden O. Watson, Whatever Happened to Baby Jane, Joseph D. Kelly. 1963, How the West Was Won, Franklin Milton, Metro Goldwyn Mayer Studio, Bye Bye Birdie, Charles Rice, Captain Newman, M.D. Walden O. Watson, Cleopatra, James Corcoran and Fred Hines. It's a Mad, 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 Mad World. Gordon E. Sawyer. 1964, My Fair Lady, George Groves, Warner Brothers Studio, Beckett, John Cox, Father Goose, Walden O. Watson, Mary Poppins, Robert O. Cook, The Unsinkable Molly Brown, Franklin Milton. 1965, The Sound of Music, James Corcoran and Fred Hines, 20th Century Fox Studio, The Agony and the Ecstasy, James Corcoran, Dr. Zhivago, A. W. Watkins and Franklin Milton, The Great Race, George Grooves, Shenandoah, Walden O. Watson. 1966, Grand Prix, Franklin Milton, Metro Goldwyn Mayer Studio, Gambit, Walden O. Watson, Hawaii, Gordon E. Sawyer, The Sand Pebbles, James Corcoran, Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf, George Grooves. 1967, In the Heat of the Night, Samuel Goldwyn Studio Sound Department, Camelot, Warner Brothers 7 Arts Studio Sound Department, The Dirty Dozen, Metro Goldwyn Mayer Studio Sound Department, Dr. Dolittle, 20th Century Fox Studio Sound Department, Thoroughly Modern Millie, Universal City Studio Sound Department. 1968, Oliver, Shepperton Studios Sound Department, Bullet, Warner Brothers 7 Arts Studio Sound Department, Finian's Rainbow, Warner Brothers 7 Arts Studio Sound Department, Funny Girl, Columbia Studio Sound Department, Star, 20th Century Fox Studio Sound Department. 1969, Hello, Dolly, Jack Solomon, Murray Spivak, Anne of the Thousand Days, John Aldred, Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, William Edmondson and David Dockendorf, Gailey, Robert Martin and Clem Portman, Marooned, Les Fresholtz and Arthur Piantadosa. 1970s. 1970, Patton, Douglas Williams, Don Bassman, Airport, Ronald Pierce and David H. Moriarty, Ryan's Daughter, Gordon McCallum and John Brommel, Tora, Murray Spivak and Herman Lewis, Woodstock, Dan Wallin and L. A. Johnson. 1971, Fiddler on the Roof, Gordon McCallum, David Hildyard, Diamonds Are Forever, Gordon K. McCallum, John W. Mitchell and Al Overton, The French Connection, Theodore Soderbergh and Christopher Newman, Koch, Richard Portman and Jack Solomon, Mary, Queen of Scots, Bob Jones and John Aldred. 1972, Cabaret, Robert Knudsen, David Hildyard, Butterflies Are Free, Arthur Piantadosa and Charles T. Knight, The Candidate, Richard Portman and Jean Cantamessa, The Godfather, Charles Grenzbach, Richard Portman and Christopher Newman, The Poseidon Adventure, Theodore Soderbergh and Herman Lewis. 1973, The Exorcist, Robert Knudsen, Chris Newman, The Day of the Dolphin, Richard Portman and Larry Yost, The Paper Chase, Donald O. Mitchell and Larry Yost, Paper Moon, Richard Portman and Les Fresholtz, The Sting, Ronald Pierce and Robert R. Bertrand. 1974, Earthquake, Ronald Pierce, Melvin Metcalf, Sr., Chinatown, Charles Grenzbach and Larry Yost, The Conversation, Walter Merck and Art Rochester, The Towering Inferno, Theodore Soderbergh and Herman Lewis, Young Frankenstein, Richard Portman and Jean Cantamessa. 1975, Jaws, Robert Hoyt, Roger Heeman, Earl Madery, John Carter, Bite the Bullet, Arthur Piantadosa, Les Fresholtz, Richard Tyler and Al Overton, Jr., Funny Lady, Richard Portman, Don McDougall, Curly Thirlwell, Jack Solomon, The Hindenburg, Leonard Peterson, John A. Bolger, Jr., John L. Mack and Don Sharpless, The Wind and the Lion, Harry W. Tetrick, Aaron Rochin, William McCauley and Roy Charman. 1976, All the President's Men, Arthur Piantadosa, Les Fresholtz, Dick Alexander, Jim Webb, King Kong, Harry W. Tetrick, Posthumous Nomination, William McCauley, Aaron Rochin and Jack Solomon, Rocky, Harry W. Tetrick, Posthumous Nomination, William McCauley, Lyle J. Burbridge and Bud Alper, Silver Streak, Donald O. Mitchell, Douglas O. Williams, Richard Tyler and Harold M. Etherington, A Star is Born, Robert Knudsen, Dan Wallin, Robert Glass and Tom Overton. 1977, Star Wars, Don McDougall, Ray West, Bob Minkler, Derek Ball, Close Encounters of the Third Kind, Robert Knudsen, Robert Glass, Don McDougall and Jean Cantamessa, The Deep, Walter Goss, Dick Alexander, Tom Beckert and Robin Gregory, Sorcerer, Robert Knudsen, Robert Glass, Richard Tyler and Jean-Louis Ducarme, The Turning Point, Theodore Soderbergh, Paul Wells, Douglas O. Williams and Jerry Yost, 1978, The Deer Hunter, Richard Portman, William McCauley, Aaron Rochin, Darren Knight, The Buddy Holly Story, Tex Rudloff, Joel Fine, Curly Thirlwell and Willie D. Burton, Days of Heaven, John Wilkinson, Robert W. Glass, Jr., John T. Wrights and Barry Thomas, Hooper, Robert Knudsen, Robert Glass, Don McDougall and Jack Solomon, Superman, Gordon K. McCallum, Graham V. Hartstone, Nicholas Le Mesurier and Roy Charman, 1979, Apocalypse Now, Walter Merck, Mark Berger, Richard Beggs, Nat Boxer, The Electric Horseman, Arthur Piantadosa, Les Fresholds, Michael Minkler and Al Overton, Jr., Meteor, William McCauley, Aaron Rochin, Michael J. Coet and Jack Solomon, 1941, Robert Knudsen, Robert Glass, Don McDougall and Jean Cantamessa, The Rose, Theodore Soderbergh, Douglas O. Williams, Paul Wells and Jim Webb, 1980s, 1980, Star Wars Episode 5, The Empire Strikes Back, Bill Varney, Steve Maslow, Greg Landacre, Peter Sutton, Altered States, Arthur Piantadosa, Les Fresholds, Michael Minkler and Willie D. Burton, Coal Miner's Daughter, Richard Portman, Roger Heeman and James R. Alexander, Fame, Michael J. Coet, Aaron Rochin, J.M. Harding and Christopher Newman, Raging Bull, Donald O. Mitchell, Bill Nicholson, David J. Kimball and Les Lazarowitz, 1981, Raiders of the Lost Ark, Bill Varney, Steve Maslow, Greg Landacre, Roy Charman, On Golden Pond, Richard Portman and David M. Ron, Outland, John Wilkinson, Robert W. Glass, Jr., Robert Thirlwell and Robin Gregory, Pennies from Heaven, Michael J. Coet, J.M. Harding, Richard Tyler and Al Overton, Jr., Reds, Dick Voracek, Tom Fleischman and Simon K. 1982, E.T. The Extraterrestrial, Robert Knudsen, Robert Glass, Don DiGirolamo, Jean Cantamessa, Das Boot, Milan Bohr, Trevor Pike and Mike Lemaire, Gandhi, Jerry Humphreys, Robin Odenoghu, Jonathan Bates and Simon K. Titsey, Arthur Piantadosa, Les Fresholds, Dick Alexander and Les Lazarowitz, Tron, Michael Minkler, Bob Minkler, Lee Minkler and James LaRue, 1983, The Right Stuff, Mark Berger, Tom Scott, Randy Tom, David McMillan, Never Cry Wolf, Alan Splett, Todd Bokelheide, Randy Tom and David Parker, Star Wars Episode 6, Return of the Jedi, Ben Burt, Gary Summers, Randy Tom and Tony Daw, Terms of Endearment, Donald O. Mitchell, Rick Klein, Kevin O'Connell and James R. Alexander, War Games, Michael J. Coet, Carlos Delarios, Aaron Rochin and Willie D. Burton, 1984, Amadeus, Mark Berger, Tom Scott, Todd Bokelheide, Chris Newman, 2010, Michael J. Coet, Aaron Rochin, Carlos Delarios and Jean Cantamessa, Dune, Bill Varney, Steve Maslow, Kevin O'Connell and Nelson Stoll, A Passage to India, Graham V. Hartstone, Nicholas Le Mesurier, Michael A. Carter and John W. Mitchell, The River, Nick Alphin, Robert Thirlwell, Richard Portman and David M. Ron, 1985, Out of Africa, Chris Jenkins, Gary Alexander, Larry Stensvold, Peter Hanford, Back to the Future, Bill Varney, B. Tennyson Sebastian II, Robert Thirlwell and William B. Kaplan, A Chorus Line, Donald O. Mitchell, Michael Minkler, Jerry Humphreys and Christopher Newman, Lady Hawk, Les Fresholds, Dick Alexander, Vern Pur and Bud Alper, Silverado, Donald O. Mitchell, Rick Klein, Kevin O'Connell and David M. Ron, 1986, Platoon, John Wilkinson, Richard Rogers, Charles Grenzbach, Simon K. Aliens, Graham V. Hartstone, Nicholas Le Mesurier, Michael A. Carter and Roy Charman, Heartbreak Ridge, Les Fresholds, Dick Alexander, Vern Pur and Bill Nelson, Star Trek IV, The Voyage Home, Terry Porter, David J. Hudson, Mel Metcalf and Jean Cantamessa, Top Gun, Donald O. Mitchell, Kevin O'Connell, Rick Klein and William B. Kaplan, 1987, The Last Emperor, Bill Rowe, Ivan Sherrick, Empire of the Sun, Robert Knudsen, Don DiGirolamo, John Boyd and Tony Daw, Lethal Weapon, Les Fresholds, Dick Alexander, Vern Pur and Bill Nelson, RoboCop, Michael J. Coet, Carlos Delarios, Aaron Rochin and Robert Wald, The Witches of Eastwick, Wayne Artman, Tom Beckert, Tommy Dahl, Art Rochester, 1988, Bird, Les Fresholds, Dick Alexander, Vern Pur, Willie Burton, Die Hard, Don J. Bassman, Kevin F. Cleary, Richard Overton and Al Overton, Jr., Gorillas in the Mist, The Story of Dian Fossey, Andy Nelson, Brian Saunders and Peter Hanford, Mississippi Burning, Robert J. Litt, Elliot Tyson, Rick Klein and Danny Michael, Who Framed Roger Rabbit, Robert Knudsen, John Boyd, Don DiGirolamo and Tony Daw, 1989, Glory, Donald O. Mitchell, Greg Rudloff, Elliot Tyson, Russell Williams, The Abyss, Don J. Bassman, Kevin F. Cleary, Richard Overton and Lee Orloff, Black Rain, Donald O. Mitchell, Kevin O'Connell, Greg P. Russell and Keith A. Wester, born on the 4th of July, Michael Minkler, Gregory H. Watkins, Wiley Stateman and Todd A. Maitland, Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade, Ben Burt, Gary Summers, Sean Murphy and Tony Daw, 1990s, 1990, 63rd, Dances with Wolves, Jeffrey Perkins, Bill W. Benton, Gregory H. Watkins, Russell Williams, Days of Thunder, Charles M. Wilburn, Donald O. Mitchell, Rick Klein and Kevin O'Connell, Dick Tracy, Thomas Causey, Chris Jenkins, David E. Campbell and Doug Hemphill, The Hunt for Red October, Richard Bryce Goodman, Richard Overton, Kevin F. Cleary and Don J. Bassman, Total Recall, Nelson Stoll, Michael J. Coet, Carlos Delarios and Aaron Rochin, 1991, 64th, Terminator 2, Judgment Day, Tom Johnson, Gary Rydstrom, Gary Summers, Lee Orloff, Backdraft, Gary Summers, Randy Tom, Gary Rydstrom and Glenn Williams, Beauty and the Beast, Terry Porter, Mel Metcalf, David J. Hudson and Doc Kane, JFK, Michael Minkler, Greg Landacre and Todd A. Maitland, The Silence of the Lambs, Tom Fleischman and Christopher Newman, 1992, 65th, The Last of the Mohicans, Chris Jenkins, Doug Hemphill, Mark Smith, Simon K. Aladdin, Terry Porter, Mel Metcalf, David J. Hudson and Doc Kane, A Few Good Men, Kevin O'Connell, Rick Klein and Robert Eber, Under Siege, Donald O. Mitchell, Frank A. Montano, Rick Hart and Scott D. Smith, Unforgiven, Les Fresholds, Vern Poor, Dick Alexander and Rob Young, 1993, 66th, Jurassic Park, Gary Summers, Gary Rydstrom, Sean Murphy, Ron Judkins, Cliffhanger, Michael Minkler, Bob Beamer and Tim Cooney, The Fugitive, Donald O. Mitchell, Michael Herbick, Frank A. Montano and Scott D. Smith, Geronimo, An American Legend, Chris Carpenter, Doug Hemphill, Bill W. Benton and Lee Orloff, Schindler's List, Andy Nelson, Steve Peterson, Scott Millen and Ron Judkins, 1994, 67th, Speed, Greg Landacre, Steve Maslow, Bob Beamer, David McMillan, Clear and Present Danger, Donald O. Mitchell, Michael Herbick, Frank A. Montano and Art Rochester, Forrest Gump, Randy Tom, Tom Johnson, Dennis S. Sands and William B. Kaplan, Legends of the Fall, Paul Massey, David E. Campbell, Chris David and Douglas Ganton, The Shawshank Redemption, Robert J. Litt, Elliot Tyson, Michael Herbick and Willie D. Burton, 1995, 68th, Apollo 13, Rick Dior, Steve Peterson, Scott Millen, David McMillan, Batman Forever, Donald O. Mitchell, Frank A. Montano, Michael Herbick and Petcher Hillittle, Braveheart, Andy Nelson, Scott Millen, Anna Belmer and Brian Simmons, Crimson Tide, Kevin O'Connell, Rick Klein, Gregory H. Watkins and William B. Kaplan, Waterworld, Steve Maslow, Greg Landacre and Keith A. Wester, 1996, 69th, The English Patient, Walter Merck, Mark Berger, David Parker, Chris Newman, Evita, Andy Nelson, Anna Belmer and Ken Weston, Independence Day, Chris Carpenter, Bill W. Benton, Bob Beamer and Jeff Wexler, The Rock, Kevin O'Connell, Greg P. Russell and Keith A. Wester, Twister, Steve Maslow, Greg Landacre, Kevin O'Connell and Jeffrey Patterson, 1997, 70th, Titanic, Gary Rydstrom, Tom Johnson, Gary Summers, Mark Ulano, Air Force One, Paul Massey, Rick Klein, Doug Hemphill and Keith A. Wester, Con Air, Kevin O'Connell, Greg P. Russell and Art Rochester, Contact, Randy Tom, Tom Johnson, Dennis S. Sands and William B. Kaplan, L.A., Confidential, Andy Nelson, Anna Belmer and Kirk Francis, 1998, 71st, Saving Private Ryan, Gary Rydstrom, Gary Summers, Andy Nelson, Ron Judkins, Armageddon, Kevin O'Connell, Greg P. Russell and Keith A. Wester, The Mask of Zorro, Kevin O'Connell, Greg P. Russell and Pud Cusick, Shakespeare in Love, Robin Odenoghu, Dominic Lester and Peter Glossop, The Thin Red Line, Andy Nelson, Anna Belmer and Paul Brinkat, 1999, 72nd, The Matrix, John T. Wrights, Greg Rudloff, David E. Campbell, David Lee, The Green Mile, Robert J. Litt, Elliot Tyson, Michael Herbick and Willie D. Burton, The Insider, Andy Nelson, Doug Hemphill and Lee Orloff, The Mummy, Leslie Schatz, Chris Carpenter, Rick Klein and Chris Monroe, Star Wars Episode 1, The Phantom Menace, Gary Rydstrom, Tom Johnson, Sean Murphy and John Midgley, 2000s, 2010s.